Okay, good evening. How are we all tonight? Can we hear me here? Let me know if you can't hear me, guys. Well, so we're trying a couple new things, generally speaking. The music Pippa is Red Alert 3. Uh, we're trying a couple new things here, relatively speaking. You might notice that I have temporarily given you the motion of the looping video for video essays. Uh, Unfortunately, I got caught up in a whole bunch of stuff this week. So this week's essay is delayed, or last week's essay is delayed till this week. Hooray. Uh, in the meantime, I thought we'd get together tonight and talk about some stuff because it's been quite the week, huh? Uh, starting with Lauren Boebert, who decided to have a great time at Beetlejuice in Denver and lied about it, despite the fact that there were security cameras that caught the whole thing. Colorado, Colorado Representative Lauren Boebert apologized after she and a male companion were ushered out of a production of Beetlejuice in Denver last weekend for disrupting the show, which is a very kind way of saying that she decided to behave like an inappropriate teenager in the middle of a packed theater. Like most teenagers know better. They know to sit in the back where in an empty movie that no one's going to be in. There's no perfect blueprint for going through a public and a difficult divorce, which over the past 2 months has made for challenging personal time for me and my entire family. Sure, but this is completely unrelated to giving a handy in a crowded theater while simultaneously admonishing LGBTQ and trans people for being groomers and a threat to children. Boebert made statements like, "Do you know who I am?" and "I will be contacting the mayor," according to an incident report. Another video appears to show Boebert and a male companion fondling each other sexually during the show. So basically, she went full Karen. Oh no, she absolutely does think she's above the law, Palm Dad. It's quite clear. I also think she's like above being put on camera. Well, yeah. I mean, I don't think anyone particularly cares that Lauren Boebert is dating or that she's doing a public goes to a show with a person or any of those things or that she has a new partner. Those things are not the problem. The problem is the extreme amount of hypocrisy that's been put on display for this. And like it's an especially stupid move as a politician in her position because when she tried to get reelected during midterms, it was a hair's breadth from turning against her. Like she was so incredibly close to losing everything in this. Uh, and then no one cares who she is anymore, right? Because she's just a one-term defeated congresswoman. Yeah, I imagine the Democrat in question is going to utterly crush through her. Uh, but you know, what's fun is fun. While I transition here, I want to point out that we have pinned uh, our Stream Elements donation link up in the chat tonight. Uh, you'll notice that this is not me in the corner of the picture tonight. It is the looping video. We're going to be making some upgrades, production value upgrades over time, including better than the internal mounted web cameras on our laptops. So if you feel obliged to donate, it's right here in the stream chat or in the description box down below. And until that time, until we can make a Asked the Binman to skip this. Uh, what's the mayor gonna do? Probably refund her money for something. I don't know. Like that's a statement usually made by people who don't actually intend on following up on it. But at any rate, uh, we're making some changes. Generally addressing, you get to see our prettier faces when we get this done. So anything helps. The other thing I want to talk about tonight, and this will take up a bit of time, is the uh, auto workers strike. The Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild of America strike is a pretty big deal, and I hope all the best for them. But the auto workers voted to go on strike this past week, and it is really consequential. Kind of hopefully represents a resurgence in American labor. One of my Twitter follows, Dr. Bradley Summers, is a labor historian, and he posted about that. So I'm just going to crib from him. At midnight, the UAW and 150,000 of its members went on strike. The strike itself is rather unprecedented. The 97% of the members voting for the strike is not historical. But this is the first time all three big manufacturers in Detroit are facing a strike, and the implications are huge. He goes on to talk about what the UAW is advocating for, and this is also big. It's kind of going to be build off of how we have started to view the economy and work in particular post the COVID lockdowns. Like, there's obviously been a very public push and pull between employers, more accurately, landlords of office buildings, and workers of a work from home versus go back to the office situation. And this is a kind of a big deal in a lot of ways, because like a substantial portion of people who basically add nothing to the economy and landlords for office buildings, property management companies and like, are faced with the prospect that they are simply unnecessary because of the fact that the economy largely could function, and in so many cases, with people working from home. That the internet has rendered the necessity to have an office available less of an issue. And like, companies build a lot into this, don't they? They build a lot into the infrastructure that allows them to have offices. They have middle managers and a whole levels of management below what's really needed. It's talked about in that phenomenon of bullshit jobs. So there has been an opportunity, I think, to address labor and how we view work in this country in the past 3 years that has gone very much unheeded. But hopefully with this strike, some of that's starting to change. And he points out, Dr. Summer points out that in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, when bailouts were being issued left, right, and center to capital, who had largely dug themselves into a hole, the workers forwent their benefits and to cut costs and save their jobs. And now they're basically rigging the receipt due. Massive growth in car sales. So one of the things they're pushing for, and I think this is essential, is a 4-day work week. So many Americans are in jobs for significant periods of time that they don't need to be. A 5-day work week is in a lot of ways obscene, and you would expect with the advance of technology, automating jobs, that we would be able to reclaim more of our time for ourselves. And he makes an excellent point. Most of those upper level managers are not working 40 hours. Meeting with investors on golf courses is not work. This part, he says, finally combating hustle culture and toxic work ethos that pervades American society. it really depends on how this shakes out. Because if they get the 32-hour work week and they get paid for it, I think, yeah. But what people will start doing in that case is arguing that they need a 4-day work week so they can better pursue a hustle. The other things they're arguing for is retiree health care, better wages for entry-level jobs, and a 32-hour work week. And this is an important line because I used to be in a IBEW for a job, and I was very frustrated by the lack of push back the IBEW gave. And it was a union-wide thing. Like, not just, it was just a generally labor thing. Labor never wanted to rock the boat. They didn't want to push too hard or too far with companies. But now with this upswing, and like you had the case of the avocado toast guy complaining about it last week, with that upswing, we come about to a position where there's a considerable amount of ability for labor to make demands, and they're doing it. It's going to cost billions for the auto industry. And he acknowledges that Joe Biden might intervene, although that would be incredibly risky for him now at this point, with Trump having kickstarted the election so early. And even if Biden does nothing, either way, it's still more of a victory for the auto workers. Now, I'm going to kind of throw a bucket of water on all this because, historically speaking, strident demands by unions are met with viciousness by capital. So, Detroit in particular has a very long history, and Flint to a lesser extent, has a very long history of auto worker strikes, of varying degrees of success and violence resulting from those things. I my principal concern is that they turn to violence again this time, and they engage in strike-breaking tactics that would make the Pinkertons blush. Because I would be not entirely surprised if between Hollywood and the Detroit automakers, they are all quite panicking, and everyone else is sort of looking at the situation and panicking too. So, we get to a point where I don't think it's something they should stop doing by any means. No one should stop striking, demanding better labor conditions. The fact that we have basically sat on stagnant wages for nigh on 50 years now, compared to a massive increase of worker productivity, is just simply abhorrent. But I think we need to start preparing ourselves for the possibility of seeing new waves of violence against labor. With cameras and phones now, that would make them not look really good, I suppose, on a certain level. But cameras and phones, for example, are available at BLM protests. And while the police don't look good, it doesn't really seem to have much of an impact on the police's willingness to use force. And that's, it's an optics thing at the end of the day. You're absolutely right, Palm Dad, but it's not necessarily, horrible optics for them if they win it. Yeah, I think there is truth to that, Pippa, and that there's very much diminishing returns to how long you have an employee at work. Um, eventually they just stop working well, and you're just throwing money into. Great example, referring back to that labor union job, we had mandatory overtime, which is a stupid idea. Companies shouldn't do that. I know people want to make money. If people want to volunteer for overtime, knock yourself out. But mandatory overtime is dumb because they didn't get much efficacy out of it because everyone basically started dragging their feet. Uh, it was a call center job, so everyone started dragging their feet, and you didn't really impact the KPIs, which caused the work to build up for the next day, and then you get mandatory overtime again. So then we would have entire portions of the summer where mandatory overtime was just there, and storms come around, and suddenly they've clocked out they've clocked out sometimes 2 to 4 hours of how long they can keep people there by contract. Yeah. And even if it's a good paying job, like, yay, I made a lot of money, but what am I going to spend it on while I'm stuck here in this cubicle? And like this kind of comes to a vision of how we should work going forward in society, because the truth is technology advances all the time, and it makes automation possible in a lot of ways. And we're not using that to make people work less and pursue things more. We're trying to use that to wring more work out of people for less pay. I saw something the other day where they're now using AI to track workers in fast food restaurants, how fast they serve and how much they serve and how much work they do. And the other thing that I noticed on this particular display was they were tracking how long you sat in the restaurant, which is an interesting thing to check, I think, because it obviously, if you're in a restaurant, you want to turn around tables and get more people through the door in eating your food at any given time. And this is the same whether it's a fast food restaurant or a sit down restaurant, right? So there's obviously a degree to which you want to turn over quickly. And for example, if you've gone to a big American city and you've gone to a chain fast food restaurant, quite often you will see a sign placed big over the dining area that says you can only stay here for 30 minutes, blah, 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 blah. And this is to encourage people to move and not stay in the restaurant all day. And it's also largely an anti-homeless measure as well. And in a lot of those cases, like, it doesn't tend to show up in rich neighborhoods in Chicago, and usually only shows up nearly identifying a loss center of how long you have people sitting there. Like this particular was from a coffee shop. So I think this is the first step in identifying a potential form of loss, where is how can we get people to move on, which means we might make the dining experience more pleasant. And it will be through really, really insidious things, I think, too, like chairs that are angled just enough to piss you off over a period of time the longer you sit in them. Like this is kind of what the future is probably going to end up looking like in a lot of cases for capitalism, because there's only so much blood you can squeeze from a stone. So I feel like now is the time for labor to start making those advances, and now is the time for consumers to start putting their foot down. So this auto worker strike is, I think, because it's so incredibly unique in its demands, and because it is happening at this exact moment in our nation's history, and because we're sitting on the cusp of an incredibly critical election. And I know everyone says that each of these last four elections has been pretty critical, but this one really is. This is possibly the most difficult presidential election America is going to have been in since 1860. The dynamics between Trump and the Republican field, and the dynamics between the Republican field and Biden, and the particular interplay that these court cases are going to play, and how these play out, and what happens here is going to be incredibly critical. Fast food really needs to unionize. They work very hard to ensure that that's difficult. What really needs to happen is there needs to be some pretty stiff penalties for certain activities that management engages in. Like wage theft, for example, is a not a criminalized offense. A company can commit wage theft and it will receive, even if in the unlikely event that a complaint is registered and that complaint goes forward and that everyone is involved gets recouped money, they will receive a slap on the wrist. Instead of let's send executives to jail for wage theft and let's penalize investors for when it happens so that they are on it in board meetings, it's just a slap on the wrist. Like a fine to a company like McDonald's can be calculated into their cost of business. And fast food workers are like I've never worked fast food, but I've seen like the back of a fast food restaurant, and like it looks like they're canned into a hot griddle with like sardines, with barely enough room to move around, and like just enough. Like it has to be just enough legal decisions for safety. Like that has to be it. Yeah, and that kind of gets into something I was talking about the other day. Is it is an accepted practice for people who are entering that middle management level to understand to get in there in the first place that their principal objective is going to be lowering payroll with whatever means necessary. Like our behavior towards labor is horrifying. Um, it's almost predatory in a lot of cases, like collectively and societally. And this is obviously a power shift and a paradigm shift if it occurs, because again, we bring up the avocado toast man in his statement that we need to feel pain in the economy to remind the worker that they work for the employer and not the other way around. That's such a malignant idea, first of all. And second of all, it's incredibly telling of how how the richest view themselves and their role in the economy. Um, this kind of gets back to like talking about Elon Musk and my assertion that you could replace him with an ATM machine and each of his companies would probably run more efficiently. But no, tell Musk or his fans that they'll flip out. And I think that's part of this the problem is that we have valorized certain roles in our economy beyond what they really provide. Um, the venture capitalist has become seen as a vital piece when really all they have is more money than someone else. And like you can see that dynamic at play, I think, in that kind of waning area of cryptocurrency and how that played out. You had a whole bunch of people who were venture capitalists, quote unquote, and they don't provide a product. They just create hype, and then they take a whole bunch of people and take their money, and then they run off with it. And they obviously this behavior is not acceptable in a regular commodities market, but because there's a gray area around that, they think they're going to get away with it, and by and large, they probably will. Uh, so you get this battle, like people are battling for ever increasing amounts of capital in order to advance political agendas at the expense of everyone around them because they view themselves as somehow superior, which is an ironic position to take for a bunch of trust fund babies who are largely born into it, particularly for someone like Elon Musk. Which is kind of where I come at things politically too, is there's very little reason for labor not to control all it sees and all it works for and all it owns because they provide the actual work. They do the thing that creates the product if you actually have a product in the first place. There's no real reason, I think, to imagine a world where business owners are overly valorized. I don't think there's a case where you don't need someone leading a venture and organizing that venture and pursuing that venture. But like, it's not beyond the pale for businesses to elect leadership, for workers to get together and say, okay, you're the captain now, which is quite literally how pirates operated in the Caribbean in the early 1700s. co-ops are not out of the question. There is not a necessity for people to be business owners. And I used to work a lot with business owners. They're not very smart necessarily, they're just lucky. And they don't necessarily assume much risk because it's something like 50% of all small business owners whose small business fails will start a new small business. So they're obviously not so destroyed by this exercise of creating a business. It's not such a great risk. They're not putting themselves out there nearly to the degree that someone who's living paycheck to paycheck and not getting enough money from that business is to work. So there really is no reason to assume that labor can't start to win out in this period of time. So this is something that we'll be watching closely as it goes on. And I hope you'll join me for it. And this is going to be pretty short tonight, I think. We cross into an hour. I want to talk about the Illuminati stuff for the first time since it came out, because Oz Media released a video. I imagine some of you watch it with Demon Mama already because there's significant overlap between her and Sunday, and then therefore me and Demon Mama by the transitive property. I'm just going to talk about it in some more detail, at least. So we're going to go through that and talk about how to start protect yourself, I think.
Howdy everyone, I'm Oz, in the flesh. No cartoon avatar this time. I'm making this because I'm giving an update to both my regular viewers and those who are here for something a bit more specific. To my regular viewers first, I hope this video can help explain where I've been over the last 3 years. For those who are here for the Illuminati drama, I do have some news, and I'm making this video for full transparency, as I believe this is important in a situation like this. First and foremost, I need to make everyone aware, for reasons that I hope this update will make clear, for my safety, I need to put a short and temporary pause on production of my video on Illuminati. The video will still, of course, be produced. I just need to put things on a lower burn and return to regular content for the time being, for many reasons. Some of them being the honest truth that I can't afford to continue at this rate, both fiscally and physically. Illuminati has taken this to a legal front, using the courts because of how poorly things went for her on the internet. As a reminder,
I kind of looked into it too extensively. She still has a large subscriber base, but she's lost a substantial amount of views. I don't think that's coming back. However, I don't think the strategy for her is necessarily to win a court case in order to replace the lost revenue. I think what the strategy for her is going to be is to win a court case to utterly try to crush Oz and Wonderstruck, in order to avoid other people speaking up. We'll see as this goes on that she maneuvers them into a horrifying position. Just an absolutely horrifying position. Let's continue.
For those of you unaware, Illuminati started a fight with a lawyer on Twitter, accused him of copying her style, which then led to other content creators and past collaborators speaking out about their past interactions with her. Illuminati is the one who took this off of Twitter and brought it onto YouTube, where she would then post a suicide note of one of her former employees for the world to see as an attempted own. Now, full transparency, I was one of the creators who spoke out against her, despite the fears and hesitations that I had. I've put a lot of things in my life on hold to produce this video, ending up with nearly 110 pages of a manuscript which details as much of what I can. And
the physical thought of trying to record 110 pages of voiceover is awful to me. You might want an editor.
let me tell you something. Converting this monstrosity into a video with its accompanying 5,000 screenshots has been one hell of a monumental task for me, a one-person team, to embark on. I want to get everything right, or more of I need to. And I need to ensure that everyone's stories are factual. But to do so, I need to pump the brakes and not rush this out for the sake of being able to not stress about my next meal, or my next bill for that matter. Because of this, I need to, and more importantly, I want to, continue my regular content so I can afford to live day to day. There is another factor to all of this, a factor which iilluminaughtii has caused, or as I will be calling her throughout this video, Blair. For full transparency, which will be explored more in my future video, Blair and I dated. We were a couple for a decent chunk of time. This puts me in an ungodly complicated situation of doing everything that I can to try and separate the relationship drama from the public drama, as in the process of dating her, there are a lot of things which I bore witness to.
I'm not necessarily certain that the two are as separate as he wants to imagine. There's obviously a pattern of behavior at play. And she will talk very soon about how she weaponizes her public persona against and her public relationships against him. So I don't know if it separates that neatly, but I can understand the desire.
Before anything else, I want to firmly state that this update is being made with the understanding that there is a likelihood that this will end up in a courtroom. I say this because things have been escalating.
Okay, so here's a problem I see with this particular reply from Oz. He will go on to describe how he does not have a lawyer yet. I do not know if a lawyer would have advised being this candid at this point. I suspect not.
Escalating quite a bit behind the scenes, and the stress has certainly been rising. What I can only describe as retaliation from the person who's my ex, former employer, and prior colleague, Blair is in the process of currently foreclosing my home. Because of this stress of Blair taking my home from me, I need to pump the brakes and change directions so I won't be homeless come Christmas. Because that's when Blair set my home to foreclose, right before Christmas. And yes, Blair has
She's the Grinch. She's actually the Grinch.
The power to set the foreclosure sale. This situation was a fear and hesitation that I had from the beginning, even telling Wonder as far back as April, a day before my thread went up, that I was mortified that if I spoke out against Blair or even dared to cross her, that she would retaliate with taking my home from me. When I did speak out, as many of you are aware, Blair sent me a cease and desist. A cease and desist, by the way, over a Twitter thread which she apologized for not only in her video, but as well as privately. Despite this, I persisted on working on my video, continuing the production of something which started as 20 pages, then slowly grew into the novel that it's become. Throughout this entire process, I
think at this point is at a novella, but that's beside the point.
Had the fear that once I released this video, Blair would drop the hammer on me. I've lived the last 4 months of my life with the looming threat of Blair's retaliation. And truth being, from my understanding, she could have done this as early as June. As to why Blair waited so long, I'm honestly unsure. To me, it feels like Blair is taking every course of action that she can to prevent this video from being produced. From legal threats to trying to take my home, which wouldn't be surprising, considering Blair's alleged white-collar crimes I intend to expose with evidence within my video. Before any of this, however, I am taking the proper legal channels and speaking with the right people to elevate this down the needed path. Because of this, it would be unwise of me to reveal further information. I can only assume this is one of the reasons Blair is so determined to shut down my video's production. And to repeat myself from earlier, every word that I speak within this update is with the explicit understanding that this video may end up on the floor of a courtroom. In order for me to fight this,
The problem, again, he's being a little too candid.
Their production of my content is needed to help fund the production of this said video. The reason why I'm making this update is so it's understood that I'm not just ignoring my obligations and responsibilities and suddenly hiding behind a flurry of videos in hopes that people will one day forget. The reason why this video has taken so much time as it has is not only am I a one-man team producing this, but I'm also continually uncovering more segments to the story and hearing more and more voices that come forward to speak their side of things. Interviews, questionnaires, screenshots, the works. All from a number of individuals. During this process, the video will continue to remain under production. I'm not stopping this because of her retaliation. While she did successfully give me pause, I do fully intend to complete this video. Now, let's talk about how Blair is even able to foreclose on me. What put her in a position of power beyond a landlord, a mortgagee, which in my eyes is something even worse. As a quick note, Blair's name is not on any of the original documents related to my home.
What does he mean? I am making this to show I am not hiding from my obligations and responsibilities. So that's a weird sentence, and I don't think I would have put that in the script. He's trying to make the argument that he has to produce videos in order to keep his business afloat and make money, and this is how he makes a living. I think from a certain level, no, that's not what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do. I think from a certain level, what he's trying to illustrate is that he feels an obligation to people to tell the story of what happened because he's going to ask for assistance to avoid being foreclosed upon. The other thing I'm going to note is he probably has a criminal case or a civil case concerning what has happened, what she did, and Blair is launching this case to try to dissuade him from going after that one.
I'm providing all of this information to give full context to the GoFundMe as I feel it's more than deserved, as honestly, I would feel guilty as hell putting the video on pause shortly after it hit its funding goal, followed by me just continuing to upload regular content without warning. More details will of course follow with the main video, as I do not have time to fully expand on everything. As I briefly stated previously, Blair and I dated. We started when I was 20 and she was 28. And currently, I'm 23, almost 24.
Okay. This is running firmly into Daedalus's opinions on life. You can have a functional, healthy relationship with someone who's older. But there's a certain limit to this, and a lot of people think they're capable of doing it. A lot of people think they're doing it properly and really aren't. And being slightly older than a lot of our regulars, I will comment that I have seen a lot of age gap relationships. Every single one of them has imploded. Every last one. It's also a prime ground for manipulation. Like, it's very easy to start messing with power dynamics if people think you are smarter, older, more wise, etc. It becomes very easy to follow the bad patterns with partners. I just would just urge everyone to be incredibly cautious about relationships, marriages that have large age gaps. These are difficult things. And your age gap relationship should never fall below the age of consent. But at the same time, he was an adult. He was mentally capable of entering into these decisions, if not far too inexperienced. So it's not that she did anything wrong necessarily in entering the relationship, but what she did within the bounds of that relationship are frankly a crime akin to what the southern plantation owners did to the recently freed African Americans after the Civil War, and we'll talk about it.
In the beginning, Blair walked me into several poor financial decisions. My naivety caused me to believe her reassurances that I could handle all of the financial obligations being dropped onto my shoulders by someone more experienced in life than I was. Why these obligations were placed onto me?
Okay. Here's another thing I want to point out that we not judge Oz too harshly for. It's basically a trope that you take an 18-year-old and throw them in college and give them access to easy credit. And this might be less prevalent today, but it certainly was when I was that age. And they rack up a huge amount of debt. It's incredibly common a thing. It's not that he's done something particularly dumb or that he didn't know anything particularly dumb. We do not teach financial literacy in this country.
I was on the loan as a cosigner only because of my credit at the time. Eventually, though, the financial responsibilities that I incurred would stack up on me, building a mountain of monthly debt that would lead me into several financially tight months and eventually just breaking. This would lead me to asking Blair, my partner, for financial help for things such as my home, which she was living in, help from my partner, who at any given time.
Okay, another point. If you're in a relationship with someone and you are living together, you both pay. Everybody pays. If the polycule, everybody pays. Like get together, figure it out. You have an X amount of things that you actually have to physically pay, like rent, electricity, bills, etc. And then you have X amount of tasks and chores that are technically labor and would technically be paid for. You got to figure out how to do all those things, and you got to do it in a sense that is equitable. Money is the number one killer of relationships. And this is a huge red flag if you are in a state where someone is basically collecting money. And this is like especially egregious to the case of a content creator whose brand is built on pointing out hypocritical and abusive practices by companies.
Would be making up to 30 times my monthly income. These amounts of assistance would be added to a ledger of debt. And I want to clarify again. Blair wasn't my bank. She wasn't my landlord. She was my partner at this time. This ledger also includes things such as a non-refundable design fee and land deposit on a multi-million-dollar custom home that she threatened to break up with me if I didn't agree to proceed on this with her, as well as other financial expenses.
Also a huge red flag right there. Like, if you're going to, a home is a huge economic choice. It is not something that should be done under duress. The kicker of it is I highly doubt that Oz has proof of this. Because if he did have proof of this, it would probably be incredibly damning in terms of a deposition.
Is that I honestly can't account for, nor even come close to this number when digging through my own finances. This ledger would creep into the range of $180,000, an insurmountable amount where I don't even understand how she got there. That number ballooned higher and higher, the number ever increasing, and I never questioned it out of guilt for needing help. Guilt from her telling everyone, from her friends to my friends, to her employees, to hell, even her Discord staff, about my finances, oftentimes unprompted. Guilt involving the fact that...
Yeah, that's really messed up. And that's also a method of controlling people. The revealing of information of a personal nature in a public forum or a public setting, or like amongst family, or that's a really fucked up thing to do. Don't do that. Don't reveal private information. Like, there's no excuse for that. It's absolutely abhorrent.
Everyone I interacted with on a day-to-day basis looked down on me for her words towards me.
And that's entirely what it's designed to do. It's designed to make everyone look down upon you and to isolate you and make you feel alone and scared. And to do this at a position of in a position of power. This is something that bad parents do. This is something that unacceptably bad parents do to kids. This is something that abusive partners do. This is a priming. This does two things. It puts the abused into a position where they feel isolated, alone, and scared and ashamed. But it also primes people to be less willing to believe the abused when they finally speak out. It is done incredibly insidiously and on purpose. It is not an accident. And I suppose at this point I'm being incredibly definitive. I should state that these are all allegations that have no actual proof yet, and I will be happy to, what's the word? Review further proof when the time comes. But for the moment, let us all remember that these are allegations. And that I am talking in a general sense and not necessarily validating these allegations. You hear that, Blair?
Mental health. I was afraid to tell anyone what was happening because she had convinced me that I was a parasite, that I avoided telling anyone who could have helped me see what was happening out of fear of further confirmation, more eyes looking down on me. Something to note, when you're around Blair, your world revolves around her. In my case, my home was hers, despite her name not being on it. I had no friends out in Colorado, a state that I moved to at the behest of Blair. Only Blair's friends were out here. All of my connections had to be approved by her. I wasn't allowed to be friends with people she didn't like, such as click in one topic. Or
I have to point out that this is, I'm sure everyone is pretty well aware of this, but this is fairly classic manipulation and abuse.
even wonder once that bridge was burned and reduced to cinders. I was even in a position where my finances were nearly entirely controlled by her, from what debts I took on to later being the fact that she was the person who signed my paychecks. All while my world was painted to me in a light where I should be grateful for her generosity. It wasn't until recently, when I explained my situation to my parents, my friends outside of Blair's control, that I began to understand just how perverse my life had become for nearly 3 years. And I want to add, I
just want to say this in case Oz watches this and kind of sees it. It's not that your life was perverse, it's that someone did something unspeakably wrong to you. And it wasn't your fault. It wasn't the result of some failure of character. And I think this is really important, and I hope someone says this to you in your life. I really do. Debt is not a failure of character. There are so many people in the United States who have debt. Our medical system produces an astronomical amount of debt. There's a huge number of people. It's not a personal feeling. This was a person who cruelly orchestrated a situation in which you would be made to feel this way. You did not do anything wrong. This was absolutely a horrible thing that was done.
tried to pay Blair back in any way that I could, by the way. I felt indentured to her by this debt she had hanging over my head. Hell, I even took a position in her company at a lower pay to try and pay this debt back. Offered to work with her in her crypto farm for free to pay back the debt. Anything that I could to try and make myself feel useful.
Particularly in its historical context, because that's kind of my job. Obviously, most people are quite well aware of the practices of slavery that occurred in the United States, or the three United States colonies from about 1619 up until 1865. Upon the American victory in the Civil War, the defeat of the treasonous Confederacy, and the abolition of slavery with the passage of the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery except in cases of prison sentences. Yes, puppy, you are very cute. Anyway, however, what you were immediately left with in the aftermath of the Civil War is a huge number of recently freed African Americans and a huge number of Southerners who are controlling a significant amount of the resources already needed to redistribute to those freed African Americans, let them live a life. A lot of them got involved in sharecropping. A lot of them picked up farming because it's what they already knew. So what would end up happening is you'd have a plot of land given over to a freed African, and they would have to get tools and equipment to work it. And who has the tools and equipment en masse? Who has the tools and equipment en masse to provide these things and sell them to them? Was it the previous masters? Oh, yes, it was. So what they do is they would sell them these tools, these equipment, these stocks, these seeds, all the things they need, and create a debt, and then take a massive portion of the proceeds that the farmer would make selling it to effectively keep that person's labor largely under their control. This is effectively slavery, but not legally slavery. What ended up happening in a lot of cases, they became so indebted, is they basically weren't making money. They were just repaying things, because like you go into debt to buy the equipment, and now you got to live between the time that you plant the thing and you harvest the crop. So then you go. The system is called peonage, is what it is, and it's slavery by another name, using debt laws. It has eventually federally outlawed. So, prefacing this with the obvious statement that I am not a lawyer. So I cannot speak to this with any great authority, nor do I necessarily know if Colorado has a direct provision for this or it has to go to federal court. It is not beyond the pale that Oz has a case. And I hope that some lawyer looks into this story and either an appropriate civil suit is filed or the information is sent to the appropriate law enforcement agency that they may open an investigation. And if there exists not a sufficient record of the debt, but enough paper trail to validate that the debt exists and that parts of it were paid and that Blair doesn't have sufficient receipts, which also might be possible, I suspect that there might be a sufficient amount of documentation. We don't know until he says anything on that, but I suspect there might be. But with any luck, hopefully he's well positioned, because like he talks about her getting a lawyer at certain parts, and like I kind of hope at the end of the day, I really do, that a lawyer's not just taking this job and just doing what Blair wants. Like, I really hope there's some crookedness going on, and that this isn't just a thing that happened, and that a lawyer was just okay with accepting a check for this, for that trust that she created. Like, oh man, I really hope so. I really hope. I hope all the lawyer jokes that could arise from this aren't validated. I really do.
Blair's company, I helped improve it in any way that I could with my knowledge of how YouTube worked. I was able to assist in the push for Blair's channel to make the sudden and stark rise into a new payout range of 6 figures a month, all while I was being paid not even enough to get by with my monthly bills. And Blair was very aware of my finances. I sacrificed a lot of my time to try and recoup this debt while also trying to help save her channel, because
this is nightmarish. Honest to God. Like, she's making 6 figures and she's keeping, basically she's enslaving people.
In 2021, due to personal and private reasons expressed to me by Blair, This would lead me to up and almost entirely abandon my channel throughout the year of 2022. More of this story later, because there are more pieces. But this led to the end of 2022, where Blair would take advantage of not only my financial strife, but both my legal and financial illiteracy in December of that year. When I was 23 and Blair was nearly 31, Blair, with her lawyer, would create an honestly quite confusing legal document for me to sign where I would agree to pay back her debt. Blair, being the person who signed my checks, knew that I couldn't afford legal representation. Blair also knew that the $2,500 that she was having me pay monthly towards that debt was almost as much as I was making monthly working for her. This would mean that I could barely pay for anything else in my life other than the debt that I owed her. Everything I made working for her was going right back into her pocket. Blair would bring me to her lawyer's office, put me in a room alone with the two of them, with papers in front of me. Papers which I foolishly signed for a myriad of reasons, ranging from Blair expressing that this would mend our relationship, that it was the right thing for me to do, that this would also...
Unless that piece of paper is a prenup, there is no piece of paper that you can possibly sign in the world that will mend a relationship.
protect her legally and prevent her from getting into trouble with the IRS. She also would describe to me, and while I can't remember if this exact word was ever used, funds to assist me that she had committed embezzlement.
Not entirely certain that's accurate. I'd have to look much closer, particularly as we start transitioning here into an actual enterprise. I should probably make myself aware of that. That would be important.
And by converting the amount that I owed her into a loan with her company, this would save her skin legally. Now, to most people, that word may not have a lot of meaning. But to me, when I was 11, my mother was incarcerated for this exact crime, a remnant of the 2008 financial crisis. This taught me a very...
This is an editorial note, but it's not a remnant. It's a byproduct of... I'm sorry, I can't help myself. Pippa, you clearly saw what happened this morning when we put Origin stuff in Sunday's chat. It just doesn't work for me. I can't help myself but correct things.
Harsh lesson from an early age, but more importantly, Blair was aware of this past of mine. Whether this was used against me, I can't say for certain, but the idea of another person I loved being locked away, but this time for my actions, words cannot describe the guilt that I had. As I briefly stated earlier, Blair used this debt as a promise that this would specifically help mend our relationship, not our friendship, and put us on a better foot. It wouldn't be until a few weeks after signing that document that I would learn that she had already moved on, and had almost everyone in my daily life.
Now, he's not being explicitly clear about this. The how and why that happened could be really important. The how and why that happened could be really, really important to the case that is conferring. Like, if these things can be proven, then maybe he can make an argument that the contract that's created by the trust is void because it was entered into under false pretenses. I hope. I really hope. Again, not a lawyer, but that seems very essential to me. Definitely something definitely something he should consider.
Keep this fact a secret from me. Blair used all of this, promises of reconciliation and other factors, which will soon be further elaborated on, as means to get me to sign a document known as a deed of trust. I wasn't aware of the power that this document held, what it does, what it allowed her to do. Again, I couldn't afford legal representation.
It effectively can turn an individual into a entity, and radically reframe. Okay, for people who are unaware, what a deed of trust does is typically creates a pool of assets, which are strictly speaking owned by one person and places them in control of another person, barring a set of conditions. So really commonly what this will end up being is a kid is left an inheritance, which is placed into a trust, that has their parent in control of it until such time as, or their parents in control of it until such time as the kid reaches a certain age, and then they get control of the money. That's a pretty common use for a trust. What she did, I suspect, without looking at it, is take all the things that she put in his name and took control of them using that trust, which is what has given her the ability to foreclose on the house in the first place.
She knew this. This document gave her the power to foreclose if I was unable to make a monthly payment of nearly $2,500 for nearly a decade.
Yep, there you go, right there.
Blair knew that even with my income working for her, that this wasn't possible. So, it feels as though she knew that I would be destined to fall behind, that this outcome was inevitable. If the home is foreclosed or if I decide to sell, Blair gets an immediate payout, and it's because of this that I'm hesitant to take the easy way out. There's also the fact that there's just not enough equity in the home, that if this were to foreclose upon, Blair would still be out money, and she could then sue me further to get that money back. If you're looking for an easy point of evidence, as you can see with Wonder, Blair has a habit of taking advantage of younger men, 8 years younger than her, and their financial illiteracy for her own personal gain. Originally, I assumed that I would have the video produced by now, but unfortunately, I overestimated my abilities, and also had to deal with the legal and financial stress which followed. It's obvious to me that I need to focus on myself and not destroy my well-being for this video. This, of course, leads me to the GoFundMe. Not a penny of what has been raised will be used to repay Blair. I will be using the aid given for legal fees and only necessary expenses. The purpose is to aid me in potentially breaking out of what I can only call a manipulative situation with several lanes of legal red tape in front of me. This money will be used to secure a legal retainer and any legal cost, and once and only once the legal front is secured, will I use the funding to help with monthly finances related to securing my home. Finances which are not tied to Blair in any way. I also want to add that I'm not trying to escape any debt that I may rightfully owe Blair. I just don't want to fucking lose my home.
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure. There's a part of me that would love to say that it's difficult for any of the steps to be valid, but that might not entirely be true. It certainly can be a mechanism of abuse to control finances like this, which might actually end up legitimately screwing people, even if it seems monumentally unfair.
Or lose it from retaliation. For further future transparency, I intend to provide updates with my GoFundMe, which will include progress updates and invoices when applicable. I intend to be
The invoices is probably a bad idea.
as transparent as I legally can throughout all of this. And of course, I wanted to thank everyone for their patience with me. And I felt that this update was more than deserved for everyone who's been here so far. Thank you all.
So yeah. Basically, Illuminaughtii is a sharecropper. She's a plantation owner. Hey, Charlie. You picked a bad time. We're basically done. It's short. I'm tired. My back kills me. Although I kind of like this setup because I'm leaning back in my chair and everyone can hear me and no one can see me and there's still stuff to look at. This is a great setup. I might do this. Sunday had a fantastic idea. So to reiterate, Oz needs help. So what I have done is I've posted this video in our Discord, link in the description box if you're not already there, although most of the people in chat are, where he has a link in his description box to his GoFundMe. If you could toss him a couple bucks, it would probably help him immensely. So what is the plan for this week going forward? Well, we have called a series of audibles throughout the weekend. we've caught a series. We've called a series of audibles throughout the weekend. There was an original plan on Friday night for me and Sunday to cover Destiny versus Loner Box's Israel stuff, which got pushed to Saturday night, which then we both watched Demon Mama stream, so that got pushed to tonight. And then Sunday was unfortunately ill this evening, so we have pushed that somewhat indefinitely to be rearranged. So I hope that will go down this weekend. Hopefully with Hetman, assuming he starts answering messages. Grr. The other thing I plan on doing this week is rolling out essay number 2 in the Atomic Bomb Oppenheimer Discourse Series, talking about the Japanese overtures to the Soviets and whether or not they were genuine. The other thing we are looking at this week is me and Hetman are playing a game of Rome Total War, or actually 3, for your entertainment. Bets may be placed. No, they can't. This is not gambling. Don't do that, actually. Anyway, the third thing is I am writing up script notes for a second show about men's issues. A show with Neo Canada is forthcoming about Sparta not being nearly as cool as people pretend it is. And finally, I am going to start working on rearranging what was supposed to happen about a month ago before Emmanuel left for Asia and Hetman got COVID, where me, Lucy, and Emmanuel and Hetman all get together and make fun of what a faultist. So that is what is coming. Pay attention to the announcements. I will probably talk about it as it happens. As soon as I figure out what's happening with whom, you all will be the first to know. With that, I am going to wish you all an excellent evening. Stay safe, like the stream, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and please consider donating to our microphones or our cameras fund.
2, 3.